1. Backstory. In college, I went on a trip to Vienna through a program with my university. There were 8 of us college students, including me, and then 2 professors. A little information about me. It'll make sense later on how I acted in this situation. I have lived in different countries and traveled all my life because of my dad's job. Also, because of my dad's job, he taught me from a young age how to be aware of my surroundings, and how to spot people who might want to do me harm. Since I am small with blonde hair and blue eyes, I tend to stand out in most other countries. Anyways, enough background, let's get to the story. Here's the cast. Me, obviously. Oblivious friend, OF. Also my roommate, Professor 1, Professor 2, loud and oblivious, OCM, old crazy man. We had an evening to kill and decided to go to the local film festival that was going on. There were a couple interesting things that happened to us while at the film festival that were kinda odd, but more funny than anything. We were on the way to the subway heading back to our hotel. The subway was pretty empty since it was late at night. We were traveling a good time, and OF and Professor 2 were being really loud and trying to be the center of attention. I looked towards the locals and saw that all the noise caught the attention of an old crazy man, OCM. He was really scruffy with long wiry hair and a long unkempt beard. His clothes were pretty soiled, and his shirt was halfway unbuttoned, exposing his chest hair. We made awkward eye contact, and I looked away, back toward the group. I had a gut feeling about this guy. There was something about his eyes that made me really uncomfortable. About a minute later I looked back, and he had moved to the seat in the middle of the train, closer to us. Staring right at our group, I knew something wasn't right. I looked at the group to see if anyone had noticed this guy, but of course they hadn't. I didn't want to say something and make a big deal out of possibly nothing. So I decided to position myself where I could see the OCM from the corner of my eye, and still look like I was conversing with the group. Over the next few minutes, just before our stop, OCM literally inched his way closer to us. Ever so slowly, he would move closer and closer to us. I knew our stop was coming soon, so I figured he would stay on the train or we would lose him in the station. Our stop came and we got off the train and started heading up the stairs. I positioned myself in the back of the group so I could see what OCM would do. He got off the train and followed us up the stairs. Still had this insane look in his eyes. The station was fairly busy, so I figured we would lose him in the crowd. Nope. We were now outside the station and walking down the street towards our hotel. I remember the street being extremely dark, because there was construction going on both sides of the street, and there were no streetlights. We were the only ones on the street. Well, us and of course OCM. I grabbed Professor 1 by the arm and slowed him down to where he joined me in the back of the group. I told him we were being followed. He looked over his shoulder and saw OCM following about 20 feet behind us. He told me not to worry about it, and that it's unlikely that he was following us. We rounded a corner, and a few seconds later so did OCM. I nudged Professor 1 in motion behind us. He shifted, and I could tell he was uncomfortable now too. I just looked at him like, "Told you so." I softly pressed my hands on the back of OF, who, by the way, is still being really loud, and started to walk faster, making her and the others in front of her walk faster. Professor 1 followed my lead in calmly getting everyone to walk faster. We started to gain some distance from OCM, and we made it to our hotel. Everyone went in and sat in the lobby, and the professors were going to give us the agenda for the next day. Professor 1 stopped me. "Are you okay, OP?" "Yeah, I told you that guy was following us. He's been watching us since the subway." "Glad you spotted him. Thanks for telling me." We joined the group and started going through the next day's agenda. The whole front of the hotel was floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the street. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement and made eye contact with, you guessed it, OCM. The look in his eyes made me freeze, and I physically felt cold. I knew I was staring at a person, but it didn't feel like it. Bang! Every person in the lobby jumped at the sound. OCM banged on the window with both fists without breaking eye contact with me. Professor 1 stood up and got in between me and OCM, blocking his view of me. OCM started to slowly turn and walk away, still maintaining eye contact till he was out of view. That was the first time that the rest of the group noticed OCM. They all looked at me and Professor 1 and asked what happened. Not wanting to freak any of the other students out, he said, "And see, kids, that's why we don't do drugs." He got a chuckle from the group, and they all went back to talking like nothing happened. About 10 minutes later, the group went up to the rooms, and it was just me, OF, Professor 1 and 2, in the lobby still. I was filling in OF and Professor 2 about OCM. We were laughing now, because we thought it was over. Nope. The sliding glass doors opened, and OCM walked in. I stood up. I didn't want to be in a sitting position if he approached me. Once again, we made eye contact, but he kept walking straight past the front desk and down the hall that led to where all the rooms were. I could barely hear it, but he was now muttering something. It was in German. I know enough to get by, but not enough to hold a lengthy conversation. Since I was too far away and he spoke so fast, I didn't catch it. I turned to the other 3 who were sitting there in shock that OCM was back. I went to the front desk and explained to the clerk what was going on, and that OCM has been following us all night. He called for security and suggested the professors take us girls to our rooms, and then return to theirs. The professors walked OF and I back to our room on the 2nd floor without running into OCM. I thanked them, and asked that they would text me when they made it to their room. They then sent a group text to all of us not to leave our rooms for any reason tonight. OF was shaken by the experience, and I reassured her we would be fine as long as we stay in our room. It was really hot in our room, so I went to open the window. Since we were on the 2nd floor, I figured this wouldn't be a problem. The window faced a courtyard that was in the middle of the hotel, and all rooms circled around it. In the courtyard was OCM, now screaming. Again, he was speaking German, and the words that I caught were girl, blue eye, and mine. This sent chills throughout my whole body. Security had called the police, and we watched them escort him out of the hotel. I had a hard time sleeping that night, knowing that the whole time he was following us. He wanted me. So old, crazy man. Let's not meet. 2. A little background information. I'm a foreign student studying in a small town in Germany. At the time this particular event happened, however, I was still living in Berlin. I lived in an older apartment with an older lady who rented the unit to me. The kitchen connected the 2 apartments that she owns, so we technically live in a separate unit, but we share the kitchen. The star of our story, however, is not the lady. She is nice. I still talk to her sometimes. The apartment building is 5 stories high with a staircase, no elevator. We live in the 2nd story. The lady who rented the unit to me has always had a problem with the neighbors right downstairs, because they were always very noisy. They fought a lot, and when they are on their balcony it always smells heavily of smoke. The neighbors downstairs are an older couple, probably in their late 50s or early 60s. I didn't know much about them except for their phone number and their names, which the landlady scribbled on a piece of paper for me, in case they got too loud so that I could call them. Turns out I never needed the number to get to know them. One afternoon as I was cooking, the doorbell in the landlady's apartment rang, but she was out, and not long after that it rang on my side, so I thought it must be her guest trying to reach out or something. So I looked out the peephole and there stood some older lady. So I thought it must be landlady's friend. I opened the door and to my surprise there stood the lady without pants. As in she was with a shirt but was in her underwear. Now at that point, I was only in Germany for a couple of months, so I wasn't really sure if that was normal, and my German was not that good. This lady was mumbling something that I could barely make out, but since she rang the bell on the landlady's side first, I assumed she was looking for the landlady, and I tried telling her, with the best German that I could, that the landlady was out, and will probably not be back until later. But this lady still stood there mumbling something. I really could not understand her, so I just shook my head apologetically and smiled. She then began gesturing me to come with her like she wanted to show me something. So I quickly turned off the stove and I followed her downstairs after grabbing my keys. She then started to ring a bell on the door right below us. Oh, so this is the neighbor. Then came another wave of shock because after she repeatedly rang the bell, came a man to the door with no piece of clothing on except for his socks. I tried so hard not to make an apparent weirded out face, because I wasn't sure about German customs yet at that point and I didn't want to be rude, and so this must be the husband. She gestured me to come in. I was starting to wonder what her actual intention is calling me all the way down here. I thought it was something important for the landlady. But she just offered me something to drink and I declined. But she insisted on getting me water anyway and walked into the kitchen. Now I'm still standing near the front door with this man who is now staring at me top to bottom. To be honest, he looks kind of drunk, and right at that moment, I remembered how the landlady used to tell me that all they do is fight and get drunk. So I just smiled at him and stood there awkwardly. But he decided to suddenly be friendly, because he kind of just grabbed my shoulder and dragged me inside of the house to show me different rooms and the balcony and their small garden and everything. I mean, the house itself is beautiful. Such a contrast to the people living in it. It was uncomfortable to say the least because he was very much naked and staying at a very close proximity to me. His arm on my shoulders and he was just looking at my face so closely I could feel his breath on my face. He then proceeded to ask if they had a beautiful garden. I just said yes and kind of laughed awkwardly. Thank God the wife came out from the kitchen at this point and then started shouting at him for doing what he was doing. She told him it was no way to treat a guest and she handed me my glass of water, all the while still wearing no pants. I never drank the water and quickly excused myself, saying that I needed to check my cooking upstairs. After some debate, I got out of the house, but the lady is still holding me at the door, pleading that I could stay a while and sit in the garden with her. I was ready to come up with more excuses before someone came through the front door of the building and interrupted. It was a young man that lived 2 stories above us. Apparently he just got back from grocery shopping and he somehow dealt with them, and told me to go back upstairs. So I went and waited upstairs to thank him. He was done talking to them after about 2 minutes and he came upstairs to ask if I was all right, and told me not to get mixed up with those folks because they're apparently well known to be problematic. So yeah, he saved me that day and I thanked him for it. After that experience, I just kind of hurried my way to my apartment every time I got back from somewhere so that I don't run into them. I actually met her once more after that. She looked sober and was wearing pants this time. She didn't seem to recognize me though. Thankfully, I have since moved away from there. 3. A little bit of backstory. Colorado Springs, December 2017. After a horrendous several months getting away from the abusive father of my 2 children, betrayals at the hands of his family and my own, hello raised by narcissists, and a failed attempt to move to Colorado resulting in 5 months of homelessness with my 2 children, I was at the end of my rope. Now at the time there was a very specific trail cutting through the middle of the springs, where the homeless could camp and generally not be harassed or removed because a large stretch of it was owned by a nearby business. Shout out to the amazing security guards who patrolled every night. They were really nice people. By this time, I had become a part of a significantly sized group of homeless who I will always think of as family. We all watched each other's backs and they were especially protective of me and my babies. Especially the close-knit group of 5 strong dudes that were in my direct campsite. For the sake of not getting too long-winded, I'm only going to focus on one of them, Jason, who spent a significant deal of those 5 months by my side, helping me look after my kids. For a little bit of context, Jason is an ex-Marine. He wasn't super bulky, but he was certainly ripped as fuck, in a lean sort of way, and had a perpetual air that he was not ever to be fucked with. The latter statement was kind of necessary given our situation, so Jason and I are hanging out late at night with the rest of our crew after I've put the kids to sleep in our tent, warming up by our fire pit. One by one, our other campmates fell out into their tents to crash for the night, eventually leaving only myself and Jason by the fire. So the way our camp was situated, we were between 2 other camping groups. On one side there was a camp of meth addicts that we never really even spoke with, who had put an extreme amount of effort into their makeshift fencing and shelter. Bobo Palace, get. And on the other, a small collection of winter-grade tents where some of our kind of friends lived. One such friend, Dean, had just gotten his social security for the month. and came to share the celebration with us in the form of alcohol, cigarettes, and weed, essentially hobo gold. Alcohol especially really helps one feel warmer on a cold December night in Colorado. Now, I'm not really a drinker, but I don't mind a shot or two to take the edge off a week of mental breakdowns. And I certainly didn't mind a bit of Mary J to top it off. Dean brings these things and shows off to us this Halloween mask he's been gifted that looks like a skull with red LEDs in its eyes. We chat for about 30 minutes about this thing and that, and he takes off to the fenced camp on the other side to continue spreading the wealth. But before he leaves, his very last words to me are, "If you ever need anything for those kids, you just tell me, and I'll do whatever I can in a heartbeat." I graciously accept his sentiment and wish him a good night. I appreciate it, but at the time, I think to myself I probably won't take him up on it unless I really need to. And he's a bit of a dirty old man sometimes and has a habit of flirting with all the women. All of them. And I frankly don't have it in me anymore to invite that sort of potential moral obligation in my life, considering how I ended up in that situation to begin with. So about another 20 minutes goes by, and Jason and I are still just warming by the fire and chatting about the various petty conflicts that arise between all us local hobos on the daily, when suddenly, this man just appears a couple feet to my right, wearing all black Carhartt gear, a black beanie, and a dark-colored bandana over the lower portion of his face. He has rather piercing light-colored eyes, looks right at both of us and asks, "Hey, do you know where I can find Dean?" Jason and I are confused, but especially me, and we both say we don't really know by now. It's at this point I look down and see this man is holding a fucking hatchet in his hand, and also that there are 7 other people similarly dressed and armed that have managed to spread themselves out through the entire camp without being noticed until this moment. And they're each looking at the different tents in our little grouping, but not opening them or anything. I swear to God, it felt like a scene straight out of The Walking Dead, like a group of Negan survivors had just come to fuck up everyone's day. At this point, I'm about to jump out of my skin, but Jason, being the man that he is, put his hand on my shoulder and quietly instructs me to stay calm. The man asks us if we really don't know where Dean is, and Jason gestures down the trail telling them, "He was here about 20 minutes ago, and then he went off somewhere that way. He didn't say where." I will never forget how well he kept it together and managed to keep me together. Nor that even though he was sending these people in the vague direction of Dean, he was also quite deliberately sending them away from my children. We may not talk anymore now, but I'll always owe him an inexpressible debt for this, and so much more. Anyway, the entire group slips off in that direction, in dead silence, and I lose track of where they are, considering the firelight in my eyes. But I'm cemented to the spot out of pure shock and anxiety, side-eyeing the direction they went in to make sure they don't come back. It is at this unfortunate moment that Dean decides to emerge from the neighboring camp, and he sticks out like a sore thumb wearing that Halloween mask. I see the lights on it come out of the camp, and his silhouette in front of the glow from the neighboring fire, and the whole group of people just surround him, and he goes down. He disappears into the darkness, and so do they. But the story isn't over yet. For the next 2 days, I'm just in a state of shock. I've always been a horror buff, writer, and illustrator, but I have never actually been so close to a situation like that. And with my children literally 6 feet behind me, quietly wrapped up in their Arctic-grade sleep gear, all I can think is, thank God they didn't wake up. Everyone in my camp, and the other camp down the way that also consisted of our tight-knit group, who wanted a less accessible spot, spent those 2 days being amazing human beings who did a lot to help me look after my babies in that time while I came out of the shock. And we figured out where we would move to get away from there, which was certain to be quite a complex and cumbersome ordeal, let me tell you, otherwise we'd have been gone immediately. Then the police showed up. They hadn't even come here because of what happened, but because they'd gotten reports of me and my children in the area, wanted to check on our well-being and bring us a care package, which was really super wonderful of them. So I asked them if they were aware of what happened, and they seemed confused. Several reports taken and an investigation later, I had been given assistance via DHS, Department of Human Services, to get my kids into a hotel, and then later helped by my brother into a different one. When the hoity-toity 5-star hotel decided to kick us out because the guests kept complaining about the noise my children would cause. I don't know why they picked that specific one to put us in. So I was in the process of looking at low-income, zero-rent housing for me and my kids, courtesy of my new DHS worker, while I was in this situation. When on Christmas night, after I spent a few hours after my kids' bedtime, crying over not having been able to give them anything at all for Christmas, I finally step outside my hotel room door to have a cigarette, once I'm satisfied that I don't look like a hot mess. Hobos can be vain too. To be clear, in Colorado Springs and the surrounding areas, it is completely normal at this point for literally anybody to walk up to you, be like, "Hey, what's up? Want to smoke some weed?" And then it happens, everything's fine, and you probably make a new friend. But this time wasn't one of those times. A few puffs into my cigarette, I hear a man's voice to my right say, "Hey." I look over, and there's a man who looks like he's probably pretty lean underneath. Black Carhartts and a black beanie, but his scruffy long-bearded face isn't covered up. And Carhartts are really common out this way. So naturally I don't jump to conclusions. And also note that my room is in direct line of a security camera. Also, being a female young adult in the lower echelon of life, I get approached like this a lot, so I respond politely but seriously. "Hey, what's up?" "I have this huge blunt and I'm about to go round the back and smoke. Would you like to join me?" I look him in the eye for a moment, noting that he also has very pale eyes, and snuff out my half-smoked cigarette. "Thanks, but I'm good right now. Have a nice night." And with that I re-enter my hotel room and put on every single possible lock, before sitting on the bed with my kids and proceeding to stare anxiously at the window and the hotel door for well over an hour. I finally feel exhausted enough to pass out. I was almost certain it was the same man. It's possible that it wasn't, but he did not have the friendly vibe that usually accompanies a "hey, wanna smoke" encounter. And he kept his eyes squarely on me the entire time. From that point, I didn't see him again, and this time called a friend with a car to help me move over to another hotel across the highway, before 2 weeks later, leaving Colorado to return to my previous state with the babies. Since then, even though I've been through a lot more hell, I've finally got my own place with the kids, and I don't rely on anybody else to keep me clothed, fed, or housed. And we're all so much happier for it. Still, every now and then, I think about it. At one point, I talked to one of my old campmates who's a close friend of mine, and he told me that it turns out not only had Dean stolen money from at least one local meth dealer, but he'd also had a history of luring women into the forest and murdering them. And that was the reason for that to happen to him. I won't go into detail about what exactly that ultimately was, but it was pretty gruesome when they found him. I assume if that man was the same and he was coming after me, it would be because I'd spoken to the police about what I'd seen, against the advice of my peers. I don't know. It just seemed wrong to pretend like nothing had happened, even considering what I found out later. Dean might have been a little flirtatious with me once or twice, but he never tried to force anything, and otherwise was always incredibly kind to me and found several toys for my kids during our stay at that camp. So needless to say, I had a lot of mixed feelings on the matter. In any case, I feel pretty lucky that things didn't go worse than they did, which is kind of saying something, honestly. And I could go my entire life without ever crossing paths with a man fitting that description. Ever again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 419. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, for the first time in about a week or so, it's actually cool enough for me to work at a reasonable time. Still quite warm, but not unbearably so. I'll put the fan on when I take a wee break in a minute, but at least I can work without having to have a pause in between stories. Which is good because I get a lot more done, and I also generally find I'm doing a lot less editing as well. Just works out that way. If you're feeling better physically, work tends to be a lot more productive. That being said, though, I hope we still have a little bit more heat and sun because I'm starting to ease into working out again. Was actually gradually doing it a few months back till I had a wee bit of sick. I had a bug or something, whatever it was, and I'm well and truly over that now, so I don't really have an excuse to not be working out. So I'm easing myself back into that a little bit at a time, and also getting back to what I was doing, substituting the bad things that I eat for slightly less bad things, and eventually good things, little by little so you don't shock the system, because that is something you can do. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.